Dysfunctional Congress feeds fear of national debt crisis. Senator Evan Bayh's comments this week about a dysfunctional Congress reflected a complaint being directed at Washington with increasing frequency, and there is broad agreement among critics about Exhibit A, the unwillingness of the two parties to compromise to control a national debt that is rising to very dangerous heights. After decades of warnings that budgetary excesses, escalating healthcare costs, and an aging population would lead to a day of fiscal reckoning, economists and the nation's foreign creditors say that moment is approaching faster than expected, much faster, hastened by a deep recession that cost trillions of dollars in lost tax revenues and higher spending for safety net programs. Yet rarely has a political system seemed more polarized and less able to solve big problems that involve trust, tough choices, and little short-term gain. The main urgency for both parties seems to be about pinning blame on the other, about being reelected before November's elections for deficits now averaging at least $1 trillion a year, the largest since World War II relative to the size of the economy. Mr. Bayh, the centrist Democrat from Indiana, lodged his complaint about excessive gridlock on Monday by way of explaining his decision not to seek re-election. But he is hardly alone in sounding an alarm about the long-term budgetary outlook, which has Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security costs growing at unsustainable rates and an inefficient tax system that cannot keep up. I used to think it would take a global financial crisis to get both parties to the table, but we just had one. These days, I wonder if this country is even governable. Here's a novel idea. Perhaps it's time to get rid of Congress. Just have the people, the citizens, vote on everything. It would be possible now that we have the internet. Everybody or anybody that wanted to vote on national matters could just vote on the internet. It would be possible. And just think of all the money that could be saved. Then we could just have public administrators to actually carry out the will of the citizens of this country. It is an idea, perhaps not practical right away, but perhaps it's part of the future. Sensing political advantage, Republicans are resisting President Obama's call for a bipartisan commission to cut the debt, although recent studies have implicated the tax cuts and spending policies of the years after 2000 when they controlled Congress and the White House. Even 7 Republican senators who had co-sponsored a bill to create a commission nonetheless voted against it recently, if that makes any sense. The president is not giving up. On Thursday, administration officials say he will sign an executive order establishing the 18-member National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform. He also will name as co-chairman Alan K. Simpson, a former Republican Senate leader from Wyoming, and another moderate Democrat from North Carolina who, as President Bill Clinton's White House Chief of Staff, brokered a 1997 balanced budget agreement with congressional Republicans. There isn't a single sitting member of Congress, not one, that doesn't know exactly where we're headed, Mr. Simpson said in a telephone interview. And to use the politics of fear and division and hate on each other, we are at a point right now where it doesn't make a damn whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. If you've forgotten, you're an American. While he criticized some liberal Democrats' refusal to reduce entitlement benefits. Mr. Simpson also dismissed Republicans' anti-tax arguments that deficits could be controlled with spending cuts alone. But they don't cut spending, he said, referring to the years Republicans governed with President George W. Bush. Elected Republicans, however, are under intense pressure from their party's conservative base to oppose any tax increases, a line in the sand that dims any prospects for bipartisan cooperation. Yet economists, including veterans of past Republican administrations, are vocal in insisting that the debt problem is too great to be solved without increasing revenues somehow, and perhaps moving to a new consumption tax system like Europe's. The same economists also say a significant deficit reduction plan is not possible unless Mr. Obama breaks his campaign promise not to raise taxes for households making less than $250,000 a year. Last week, Mr. Obama said he would not impose that condition on or any other on a fiscal commission. So the question is, can Washington act? The situation is complicated by a debate over how quickly Washington should act, even if it could. The Obama administration, congressional Democratic leaders, and many economists are pushing for additional government stimulus measures, while the private sector remains weak. But anger about big deficits has stoked the populism ruling politics, and Republicans as well as some conservative Democrats want to cut spending right now as a way of addressing perceptions among voters that government has gotten too big, too intrusive, and too much spending. Mr. Obama himself proposed a budget that would freeze spending on some categories of domestic spending for 3 years. Many economists say the President and Congress could send a strong signal to global markets by agreeing this year to a package of both long-term tax increases and spending reductions, especially in the popular entitlement programs that would not take effect until 2012. That is the recommendation of 2 new studies, one from a diverse group sponsored by the National Academy of Sciences, and a separate joint project of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. As debt rises, so do interest costs. By 2014, at a projected $516 billion, they will exceed the budget for annual appropriations for domestic programs. The government will be competing with the private sector for credit, forcing interest rates higher and imperiling future prosperity. Foreign investors now own more than half of the publicly held debt, and officials for the largest creditor, China, have fretted publicly about the fiscal course of the United States. While few expect foreigners to dump their assets, at least not yet, since the resulting plunge in values would hurt them as well as everyone else, the fear is that investors will demand higher interest payments and reduce or stop future debt purchases, threatening the U.S. government's ability to finance its borrowing. Lesser financial and fiscal crises have brought the two parties together to compromise on tough choices about taxes and spending. Those bipartisan deals were done during times of divided government, when one party had the White House and the other controlled at least one chamber of Congress, giving each side some governing responsibility to find solutions. But now, with Democrats controlling the White House and Congress, the parties have less incentive to work together. Because the worst of the fiscal problem remains months or years away, and therefore somewhat hypothetical to most people. There is also not the same incentive to act. Making the hard choices. So, when will Congress make the hard choices? Or have they become incapable of doing that? Anyway, there's something much more going on here. These are more signs of the end times. Transition days. The transition is a process. It's happening. It is in effect. And there are many signs.